Hello everyone, this is the business case for using video interviewing. If you're just joining us now, we're going to get started in just a second here. Again, we're going to be talking a little bit more about how to build like a business case for video interviewing. We're also going to give you a better idea of what video interviewing is, how it can be used, and other applications within your organization around that. So I'm just going to jump in here. Everybody should be able to see my screen. And again, we're really gearing this presentation to the recruiting folks, those people in HR that have some oversight within recruiting, as well as key stakeholders that are related to the talent acquisition or recruiting process. So just a little brief background about myself. My name is Christopher Young. My background prior to Async Interview, which I'll get to in a second, was primarily in management consulting. I did a lot of strategic consulting for private and public sector. And then I went on to start Async Interview. I'm now the CEO of Async Interview. It's a video interviewing provider. We provide a number of different video interviewing tools to primarily employers to leverage against the candidates. And that's in a video interviewing setting. It's all SaaS or web-based, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. I also sit here on the virtual conference that you're talking about today for online staffing and sourcing. I am an advisory board member, where I assist HR.com in some of the strategic initiatives that they have, as well as events like this, where you can gain additional information, knowledge around what's going on in the industry. I do have a pretty big presence on Twitter, so feel free to tweet questions out if you come up with them later today, or even if you're not comfortable or not sure how to actually add a question in this webinar, feel free to use my Twitter handle, Chris Young R. I'll be happy to get back to you as soon as I can. And you'll see that on just about every slide, so you can also just tweet that if you need. So again, what we're going to talk about is really three key things today. So the first is we're going to cover a little bit of background information about video interviewing. So what is it? It's becoming a big buzzword within the industry. We're starting to hear a little more about it. So what is it? Why is it not necessarily Skype or some of the other video conferencing tools that you're hearing? And what's the influx of these vendors like Async Interview that pop up? How is it being used? So what are the different use cases of video interviewing? There are a number of different tools, as well as the applications within this system as well. So it's not just cut and dry your video conference type model. So we'll talk about the different solutions that are out there, how they can really fit into your process. And then after that, what we'll do is we'll really cover the ROI of video interviewing. So let's take these different tools that we're discussing and really time them or apply them to your use cases. And then what's the ROI that you can experience by taking this tool and applying it to that application. Okay. After that, what we'll do is we will talk a little bit more about how to take the tools that you've learned about, if you haven't already heard about them. We'll take the ROI from each of them and apply that to a business case that you can then present to your executive team, your leadership, whatever key stakeholders that might be, even if it's just your own recruitment team to sell this internally. And what we're finding is that you can take that one pager and really apply the video interviewing solutions to these problems that you can identify and make a quick one-sheeter that shows you've done some research. And so what we'll do, we'll also talk about how to go about building that business case, and at the end of this presentation, we can provide you some templates and the guides to help improve upon your own specific ROI and business case. So first, let's dive into what is video interviewing, how is it working, what are the different tools. So we'll start with the first, which is what are the different tools. So first, we'll talk about this pre-recorded or on-demand notion. There's plenty of terms. Unfortunately, the industry is still fairly new that we haven't locked into specific terms for this. So you may have heard it called pre-recorded, on-demand interviewing, one-way video interviewing, or video screening. Those are really the four that are kind of floating around the industry right now. At the end of the day, it's all the same concept, which is it's the ability to have candidates record responses to questions that you've set up ahead of time, and they can record those responses on their own time. So within a given deadline, they're able to record them late at night in between their work schedules. Great for passive candidates, again, that don't want to take the time off, or they can do it late at night, and get you recorded responses to, let's say, maybe 6 or 7 questions you've set up. And then you as an employer or a recruiter can watch those interviews and share them with the key stakeholders for that type of position. So maybe you have 3 hiring managers. Coordinating schedules to get those 3 hiring managers to do an early screen with candidates is pretty difficult. And sharing just simple notes with a hiring manager is not enough information for the hiring manager to really make a decision about whether to bring that candidate on site or not. The use case of the pre-recorded or on-demand technology is really early stage. So think about your screening process. A lot of employers will take the pre-recorded and either replace a good portion of that phone screen or supplement it. So the phone screen is more of a branding call and more of a welcome to the interview process call. And then the pre-recorded is the actual content that you want to get out of that phone screen. And the reason that most people are using that is because it's a more fair, consistent process, as well as removes the scheduling and a lot of the admin work that recruiters will have to do. So recruiters can now focus on the content. So what are the actual interviews that are coming back from the candidates? What's the quality of those? And then engaging those interviews with the hiring managers. So let's say you've gotten a position with 10 candidates that have recorded a pre-recorded interview. You as the recruiter can sift through those and select maybe your top 3 or 4 that you would like to bring in. And you can share those video interviews with the hiring manager just to validate it before you've brought those 4 candidates in and actually spent the 4 hours with the hiring managers. You're not getting to that final interview and realizing that those were the wrong skill sets or something was missing in their skill set. So again, that pre-recorded on-demand product is typically used early in the process, one of the first types of screens that will be done. There we go. The other technology that's more frequently used and maybe more you might be more aware of is this live technology. So what we've seen prior to this industry really being applied to the interview industry is the ability to conduct a one-on-one. Now, this is not an old concept. People have been using Skype and other old video conferencing. If we look back to the old Kinko's model where you would rent out a room, have the candidate go to the nearest Kinko's and then conduct a live interview with you. The concept of live video interviewing is not a new concept. What is new is the technology around it. So because the technology has gotten significantly better, you don't necessarily have to rent out a room. Most of this, again, is web-based. So we can both go to a URL, log in, and conduct a live video interview without having to download any technology or even leave the comfort of our own home. So employers can conduct them from the office. Candidates can conduct them from home. And the other nice thing is that we've gotten away from this one-on-one notion. So where you can only have one person see the other person, you can have panel interviews. So take the retail industry. Retail industry is very common for having someone from the home office or corporate headquarters speak with the candidate live, as well as the actual hiring manager in the field who might be interviewing, let's say, a district manager or store manager. This allows you to have 3 people all in different locations interviewing live over the web where you can see each other. So again, this is typically used a little bit later in the process. So if you were to use both the pre-recorded and then live, this would probably come after the pre-recorded. And in most cases, it justifies whether or not you're going to bring in that candidate. So get a little bit more information, have an interactive conversation with them, and then make the investment to fly that candidate wherever they need to go to meet with the people on site. Okay. The other big thing with, I mentioned the technology improvements have really led us away from those initial Kinko's models. The reason that a lot of companies are leaning more towards a provider, a video interviewing provider on the live versus what we hear of Skype being free. You know, Google has their new free product as well, Google Hangouts. The big difference is security. So a lot of the bigger Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 companies are very concerned with the security gaps that are involved with those, in particular, those 2 technologies. And there are some very serious security holes when it comes to Skype. So if you are OFCCP compliant or EEOC compliant, there are some major concerns with using those free technologies. For some of the SMB companies, small, mid-sized business companies, it may be suitable if you're not following compliance. But again, the other big thing is that these are geared towards interview processes. So it's not just the video component. Many of the vendors in our industry do have interview guides, ratings, rubrics that you can follow along with while doing the live video interview. Okay. So those are the 2 technologies that I really want to make you aware of today. I think the live is probably a little bit more familiar. The pre-recorded typically coming a little bit earlier in the process. And so what we'll do is we'll dive into a little bit more about how these products can actually generate some ROI for your organization. Certainly there is a lot of what we call intangible ROI, and we'll discuss those as well. But really the focus of this is on what's the tangible ROI, what's my cost savings for some of these products. So first, let me dive into, I want to ask a poll question. If you're familiar, you will get a pop-up on your screen. Feel free to just select any of these that do apply. I want to just have a good background of what's everyone's familiarity with video interviewing prior to this conversation that we're having today. It'll give me a better idea of how to kind of scope some of this, and we can talk about the results. So bear with me, and I will launch this poll in a second. So let's just take a minute and go ahead and fill out the one or many that make sense. So if you are using both, feel free to select the first two, and we'll gather some results real quick. Take about another 10 or 15 seconds and fill out your results, and then I'll go ahead and share them with you. If you haven't voted, get your last vote in. I'm going to go ahead and close the poll now, so make your last votes if you can. Great. All right, so let me go ahead and share this with you. Fantastic. So everyone should be able to see the results right now. Let me just pull this up for you. There we go. So not uncommon. So let's jump right to the second one, currently using pre-recorded. And it's certainly probably the newest technology that is being used in recruitment. It's also something that people are getting more and more familiar with. So it's not surprising that we're seeing the breakdown of pre-recorded to live favoring live. And again, that's really because live video interviewing has been around for a while. I'd be interested in learning from those that selected, the 23% that selected live, to find out what products they're using. I imagine a lot of them are maybe some of the older models, the video conferencing type models. And for those that know something about it, I imagine you're probably structured in that same breakdown between pre-recorded to live, that many of those that know something about it probably know more about the live than they do the pre-recorded. So, that's why we're going to talk a little bit more today about the pre-recorded ROI as well as the live, but just to really enlighten how the pre-recorded is being used by people in our industry. And then those that are evaluating, again, that's one of the real topics of this conversation is to provide you some tools and resources to present to your leadership, so we can make it easier for you to understand what the real value that you can pitch to your leadership might be. And so I hope that for the 26 that are evaluating, this is going to be a helpful tool afterwards to build your own personal business case. And thank you, everyone, for voting. We'll go ahead and hide this now. There we go. So this is just two statistics that I think you'll find very interesting. The first one is that 58% of companies are actually using more video. And this is just outside of just video interviewing. Videos in general, from a recruiting industry perspective, are really skyrocketing. And the reason I think that we're seeing is from general web experience that videos are more engaging. So even just putting a video on your careers page or video testimonials for the different key positions that you're hiring for are much more engaging than obviously writing out a quote from a candidate. One of the great things that we see a lot of our system is that you can certainly brand your own company's interview experience through the video interviewing platform, and they'll include a careers video. What it's like to work with your company video is probably, in my personal opinion, the most crucial video to have on your careers page. And it should also be the one that's probably most engaging for candidates that are searching through your careers page. So video in general, not just from a video interviewing perspective, is becoming a better medium to communicate. So whether that's marketing your positions to your candidates, or in our case, having a video interview and really being able to assess quality earlier than just on these coached resumes, so to speak. The other one, 42% of companies are actually using video in talent acquisition. Again, this one is geared towards all of talent acquisition, so it could also be on the marketing side. But it is another statistic that people are really jumping to this video notion. So video as a communication mechanism is really a growing piece in the HR industry. Okay. So now that we have a good background in terms of what the video interviewing tools are, we have a good understanding of where everyone on this webinar is actually coming in and evaluating or learning more about video interviewing. Let's talk about what the ROI of these different tools and applications are. And Again, we'll break this down into what I call intangible and tangible ROI. So tangible will really break down to time and costs. And the intangible are all the subtle benefits that you're going to get out of moving to video interviewing. And some companies we've seen have been able to measure them. Others will treat it more as intangible ROI, or in our case, harder to measure. So let's talk about the tangible ROI first. So this is really your time and cost savings. And we'll really start on the right-hand side. So the largest benefit that we see from many of our clients is that reduction in time to fill, or time to hire, whatever specific term you're using. In most cases, we're seeing clients will have a reduced time to fill anywhere between 30 to 50%. And that is, again, the one that is most sought after by organizations moving to video interviewing, particularly on the pre-recorded side. And let's just step back and work on that process. So the pre-recorded, if you recall, was the one that was replacing that phone screen, or in many cases supplementing it, reducing the time that recruiters have to spend on the phone. But the big real catch with the pre-recorded is it's not a scheduled interview. So the candidates have the freedom to record their interviews whenever they want before a certain deadline. So maybe I'm going to invite my 25 candidates for the sales representative position, and I'm okay with getting those responses anytime before Friday. So I'll set the deadline for Friday, invite those 25 candidates, and they have the freedom to respond in between their schedules from now until Friday. Now, one of the greatest statistics that we've tracked as an organization that I'm happy to share is that over 65% of candidates that are invited into our provider system actually will do their interview outside of business hours. So take your typical 40-hour business week. We're telling you that 65% of those candidates that are invited to a pre-recorded interview are actually doing their interviews outside of that time period that you're typically working. So it's really justifying the flexibility that we're giving the candidates, and that increased flexibility is what's reducing the time to fill, because we can get the interviews done in many cases quicker than half the time that you're typically conducting them, just because of all the scheduling and admin hassles that you run to coordinating these phone screens or early round screenings with the candidates. So again, that's one of the biggest benefits that a lot of organizations seek when moving to particularly that pre-recorded or on-demand product. One of the biggest savings from an tangible ROI perspective on the live product is simply travel expenses. So if we're conducting these live interviews as a second step, maybe between this pre-recorded or phone screen and the final on-site interview, we're able to really limit or reduce the number of candidates that we're bringing to that on-site interview, because we can have a live, face-to-face, interactive interview with the candidate without having to fly them, so that when we do fly those candidates in, again, it's more for ensuring that your conversion to hire is nearly 100%, or just ensuring that they've been able to see the office, that they're comfortable meeting the people on face-to-face. But that time on site is not necessarily your organization interviewing the candidate. It's really just impressing the candidate about the organization, so that a lot of the interview can be pushed up front to that live video interview. And so what we've seen is that organizations will reduce the number of candidates that they have to bring to that on-site interview, and that's really what's cutting a lot of their travel expenses out. Okay. And that's typically a lot of what people will see on the live end. On the pre-recorded, they'll see some reduced travel expenses for organizations that are traveling to do, let's say, in-campus recruiting, traveling to do career fairs. What they'll do is they'll have the candidates do a pre-recorded video interview prior to coming on campus to determine which of their target campuses they should really be going after, or sending some of their key executives versus sending some additional individuals. And then lastly, the one that I think everyone will measure from just an overall ROI perspective, we're seeing typically up to a 5-to-1 ROI regardless of which tool. And again, some of those we highlighted, two of the bigger factors that we've seen from a tangible ROI, but really at the end of the day, what's the overall ROI? Some organizations have said that the ROI for their particular company is a lot of it's in the intangible, but some of it is in the reduced time to fill. Okay, so, and that's something that we're going to help you try to figure out when building the business case. So you're able to identify which of these key savings or ROI metrics that we're tracking here on the tangible side are going to be important to your organization? And then what are some of the intangible ROI items that we're going to go ahead and actually track? Which leads me to the next section. Okay, so the intangible ROI. Now these are, like I said, these are just items that I think are a little bit harder to measure for some organizations. Some have been really great at actually measuring them. But again, from our perspective, we found that many of the companies have trouble measuring some of these true benefits of video interviewing. The first one that I want to talk about in the top left is maintaining a consistent candidate experience. The big thing with video interviewing is the pre-recorded in particular is a little more standardized. Same with the live. Not every candidate is coming through in the same mechanism. So for a pre-recorded, let's step back. Every candidate in a given job will get the same exact question framed to them the same exact way. So you're not getting one recruiter framing it the one way, another recruiter framing it another. They can go through the exact same process of getting the questions. They'll see the same company branding. And that really just reduces the number of variables in the early screening process so that, one, you can look at it 6 months from now and evaluate what's working, what's not. For instance, what questions are you getting videos back that are helpful versus which ones do you not necessarily need to ask or can you trim out or change? There's a lot more structure in that early screening process that you can use to focus really on the quality of the candidates and not on scheduling the interviews, getting the candidates to email you back sometimes or whatever that might be. You can really focus on the quality of the candidates as well as engaging the hiring managers with an actual video interview. Which leads me to that second one, so gathering objective manager feedback. Prior to kind of us going into organizations and evaluating whether video interviewing might be a fit, one of the big things that we're learning is that there's different scenarios of hiring manager involvement, and one of them might be screen the resumes, hand me the handful of resumes that you think might be a fit, and I'll tell you which ones to screen. And then the recruiter will scribble some notes on the resumes and hand those notes based on the phone screen back to the hiring manager, who will make a decision about who to bring in. Other organizations that are a little more hands-off will just have the recruiter or hiring manager rely on the recruiter to hand those handful of candidates for an on-site interview. Whatever model that you're set up in, I think it's important to know that. But what's more important is that with video interviewing, particularly on the pre-recorded side, you're able to actually take those interviews, which are stored on the provider's site or web-based system, and you can not only share your notes or ratings of that candidate, but you can actually share the interview itself. So now take a technical position. Your recruiters don't necessarily have to be as technically savvy, because what they can do is they can gather the questions from the hiring manager up front. They can review the candidates based on their cultural fit or the first couple of questions. And then those technical questions, which they would not know how to evaluate the candidate, that's why they share the candidates with the hiring manager who can evaluate them based on the technical aspects. And again, this can all be done very early in the process so that when you're bringing in those candidates, maybe your hiring manager went from having to meet with 6 or 7 candidates on site to having to only meet 3 or 4 because they've been able to structure and align the quality of hire earlier in the process. So, and again, that's one that we see a lot of the technical roles. You can mix your questions. So you have a match of cultural fit against technical questions, and the recruiter can evaluate against the culture fit. The hiring manager can evaluate against the technical questions to make a decision about which ones to move forward in the process. So that's one that's very popular from what we've seen from our clients. The last one is really getting more qualified, and this is kind of summarizing a lot of things with the video recording. Regardless of pre-recorded or live, both of these tools are obviously involving remote technology. And so with the technology on the sourcing side, with things like LinkedIn and these applicant tracking systems that can post your job in just about any country you'd like, it doesn't really matter where you're getting the candidates. In fact, you can actually be more selective about where you're getting the candidates, not because of the location, but because of the quality that you're getting. So let's say you found a remote location that is 700 miles away from you, and you're getting great quality there because of a couple schools or whatever it might be. You're not biased towards that location because the interview process. You can actually select them, have them go through the same process that a candidate down the street might go through. And then when you've evaluated that those candidates are the right fit, it's easier to justify bringing that candidate in because you've gone through that early screening process. So it really does allow you to focus, again, on the quality of hire regardless of where they're located. whether that's in the US, down the street, or across the country. Okay. So lastly, and this is really the kind of the crux of everything, we're going to take the tools, the different products that we talked about, the ROI, some of the ROI highlights that I put together, and really structure that into a business case that you can actually present to your colleagues as well as key leadership. Before I do that, feel free to ask any questions that you have in the panel on the right-hand side. You're more than welcome to, and I'll try to address them either in between if it makes sense or at the end of the presentation. So feel free to ask any questions that you may have. So really broken the building of the business case for video interviewing in particular down to 6 key items, right? So we're going to take that first one. We're going to identify what problems are in the organization, what different things can we do to highlight them. And they may not be completely broken processes, but things that we can improve upon. And then in 2, we're obviously going to suggest a solution. And the nature of this business case is a little biased in the sense that obviously we're going to suggest video interviewing in some way or another. But it's more than just suggesting that it's video interviewing. It's what product, what's the use case, where is it being used, what vendors or free products are you going to use. And then 3 would be really taking, again, starting to get to getting to the opportunity items that you can have. So what are the different ROI mechanisms that you can start to figure out? And then in 4, you're actually going to define what would that look like if we implemented it. And then in 5, we're going to use that information of what these opportunity items, what we're going to hopefully measure at some point in time, and how are we going to justify this as a solution. So whether it's we can get our time to hire down by 6 days, or we can cut our travel expense budget for interviews by 20%. And then in 6, we just kind of give you a few tips on what to do after you've gotten this business case up and running. Obviously, we hope that you would share it with your leadership team or your stakeholders. But what else can you do to kind of help make this a success? And we're going to just run through each of these 6 steps and outline a little bit more information. I can provide some great examples. And again, at the end, I mentioned you will be able to grab a template that you can kind of fit some of this material into. Great. So first, identifying the problems. The biggest thing that we found that you have to do before you actually identify, and I use the term problems lightly because, again, it doesn't necessarily have to be something that's severely broken. But what you're looking to do is improve upon one or many of these items. And that could be, again, we've seen a lot of these be pitched, or we've seen just 1 or 2 of them. So, for example, long time to fill is probably one of our more popular ones. I think in order to be able to actually identify the problems, one of the big things that we need to have that you do as an individual that's trying to evaluate this business case is to figure out what the current process is. Best way to do this is to take the old mystery shopper model. Go to your own website, apply to a job, and have one of your colleagues kind of take you through the process as a candidate. It's probably the best way to do it. You can either do it and grab a colleague and just have them kind of walk you through the process, or you can truly act like a mystery shopper and submit your own fake resume, so to speak, and go through the process. I think you'll probably be surprised, and then you can map out the different steps along the way. If you're trying to track for time to fill, what's the time between each touch point from the organization? If you're trying to track the feedback, you can have one of your colleagues track what kind of feedback they're giving you to help drive that decision to the next step. Or if you're looking, let's say, the inconsistent candidate experience, we can talk about having multiple mystery shoppers and really just trying to see whether you're getting different touch points from different people or just different perceptions. So I think, like I said, before you identify the problem, it's really important to really know what your baselines are. So what is your current process? What are you trying to really fix? And then you can take some of these, which we highlighted on the right, and I'll walk through them real quick. So long time to fill would be the ability to basically reduce that time to fill where you're experiencing big bottlenecks in the process, whether that's just scheduling the interview with the candidate because the recruiter is inundated with recs or requisitions that he or she can't just get on the phone with the candidates to conduct these phone screens, so it might be 2 or 3 weeks out before they can even get the phone call. Whether it's that you're just getting all of your candidates that have the same exact skill set and you want a little bit more diversity. Number 3 is another popular one that we see. which is your hiring managers are pretty much hands-off. And we were talking, or John Flata was talking about this in the last session with campus recruiting. Really just getting people to not only buy into the idea of this screening process or video screening, but really having them participate. So actually sharing an interview with them and getting some sort of objective feedback that helps you to be able to identify the skill sets. And that ties into number 4, which is, it's hard for recruiters to really structure hiring manager feedback. And one of the nice things about a lot of these video interviewing tools, again, is that it's not just video interviewing. They're enabling you to, say, import or insert your interview rubric side by side with either the live or the pre-recorded interviews, so that you can be rating these candidates while you're conducting the interview. And it just helps structure hiring managers so that they don't have materials in different places, or just encourages them to be able to rate them because it's right there for them. Number 5, we talked a little bit about, which is, if your recruiters, most organizations we see, they're inundating with recruiters with too many recs that they can't focus on the quality of the candidate, engaging the hiring managers, or getting the skills from the hiring managers. So one more piece is that they're just inundated with phone screens. So if you can reduce that time, you can make them more productive on focusing with those types of elements of engaging hiring managers, getting qualified candidates, things like that. We talked a little bit about the inconsistent candidate experience. Another one is, again, too many finalists. So, and that's something that is more subjective for you to really analyze. But, are you bringing in too many candidates to the final interview? It's a very costly expense, particularly if you are flying or compensating candidates for driving in. So that's something to really analyze. If we were to bring in 2 less candidates to an on-site interview and still ensure that we're getting the top quality, what would be the cost savings for that? And would there be any drawbacks for that? And then number 8, on a later note, we've seen this from some of our clients, which is a bait and switch candidate. So you may have run into this. You may be surprised to hear this, but for phone screens, we've seen instances where candidates will have a peer or friend actually conduct a phone interview just to get them past that initial stage, and then the actual candidate will come on site. So obviously, by having a video technology, you are able to see the candidate and match it up with the on-site. So less likely to run into those situations if you are having those anyway. So what I recommend, again, just go through the current process and have 1 or 2 items that you think that video interviewing can resolve. And that'll really get us to this next section here, which we'll talk about in 1 second. So hold on 1 second. I want to actually pull. See, I've only taken a couple from the highlighted on the previous page. So just select 1 or 2 that you think would be helpful to improve upon, or something that you think your organization is actually experiencing right now. So I'm going to go ahead and launch this. Just go ahead and fill that out for a second, and we'll talk about the results. Great. So while that's coming in, I'm just going to go ahead. I did get a question. Thanks, Stephen. It sounded like my audio might have cut out on one of the last points that I brought in. So while that poll is going, I was talking about the bait and switch. The bait and switch candidates. So what we've seen in some organizations, they experience greater issues than others in that when they were conducting the phone screen, they were having a peer. The candidate was having a peer or a friend of theirs actually conduct the phone screen on their behalf. And that was just to get them through that initial stage. Granted, it's likely that they're probably not going to move forward, but it is causing some concerns for organizations that do have higher volume recruiting, and they experience this type of gaming of the system. So adding video obviously ensures that you're going to get the candidate that does the initial screening to be the one that's actually coming on site as well. So that's what I meant by bait and switch. Okay, so now that we've, it looks like most of the individuals have gotten their responses in. So 1 second, I'm just going to, if you haven't, take another second and go ahead and put in your problem that you're identifying. Great. Let's go ahead and actually share this. So not surprisingly, and certainly what I expected, that everyone, or 37% in this case, are experiencing a long time to fill. It's probably one of the most common problems that we see when it comes to video interviewing. I do enjoy seeing certainly unengaged hiring managers, only because I think that there's a number of things that can resolve that. Certainly lining up expectations with your leadership, but just aside from video interviewing, aligning your expectations from leadership for how they're supposed to be involved and at what stage. You know, we talked about going through the current process as a candidate or as a mystery shopper in this case. I think it's important not only to go through that process and outline each step, but if you're experiencing unengaged hiring managers, go through each step and identify what you want the hiring manager's involvement to be during that stage. So, you know, certainly you probably don't need them to review all the resumes that come in from the application process, but maybe you want to show them a short list and get their initial feedback to make sure that you're on the right case. Whether it's the video interview and you're sharing the interviews with them and you want them to either confirm or validate that you're on the right path, or to actually evaluate them based on specific criteria. So I think it's important to outline those specific involvements or engagements of the hiring manager during those stages. And it's certainly, with the technology of video interviewing and pre-recorded, it's certainly a little easier to involve them in the process more flawlessly. So when you are sharing interviews with a hiring manager, in most video interviewing technologies for the pre-recorded, they're going to get a link in an email. So they're not having to learn another system or even log in. They can just click on a link in an email, and that'll take them right to the video interview of that candidate. And then 17% of inundated with phone screens. That's also not common, and I imagine the feedback of that is certainly if you ask most recruiters, they will say that it does take up a majority of their time. And that is probably the easiest one to resolve through video interviewing, because it does reduce a lot of some of the admin work that takes place, even just scheduling the interviews. And I know some organizations have added that coordinator role just to kind of take care of that. But even just to take some of the load off of the recruiters of having to conduct those live phone screens frees up their day to be able to focus on some other things. Okay, let me go ahead and close that. There we go. Okay, so let's take the second step, suggesting a solution. So now that we've identified, let's say, a couple of the items, so if you put long time to fill, certainly we're going to tie our solution to how are we reducing that. You know, and again, some of these are going to be what we call the tangible ROI. So that could be you're reducing your time to fill and gathering objective hiring manager feedback, because you can obviously track those two items. You know, adding the convenience for hiring managers and recruiters is certainly a little bit more of a intangible ROI. So what we've seen is a lot of organizations, particularly the hiring managers, will say it's a lot easier for them to evaluate candidates with their actual video interview than the recruiter's notes. So it's because you're getting an impression from a recruiter versus actually seeing it for yourself. So let's just take these three for an example. These are the three that I'm going to pitch to leadership, recruiters, whoever the stakeholders are, to push for video interviewing. So I've taken those items, or three of my opportunity items, and I'm kind of switching them out so you can see different examples as we go through. But the reduced time to fill. So take the opportunity item or the identified problem that you've taken and drill that down to maybe 2 or 3 key challenges that you're facing. I encourage you, if you're not on the front line of recruiting, to actually ask your recruiters or coordinators. They'll probably be able to list more than 3, and it's your job to obviously identify the ones that are most important for the business as a whole. But you know, let's take the example of reducing your time to fill. If you're heavily reliant on recruiters and candidate schedules, their productivity is really tied to the requisition and the number of candidates. So it doesn't allow them to really focus again on the quality or engaging the hiring managers. And then one of the other things that we see is that it takes a while for hiring managers to just give you the feedback. Some of that is because whatever system you're using or whatever you're asking for in feedback is just not easy. It could be that simple. Or it's, you know, hiring managers just aren't willing to participate in the process. So it's important to identify what those challenges are so that when you do outline the solution, you're actually targeting those key challenges. Reduced travel expenses is a little bit more black and white. So if you are spending, let's say, on average, we see that organizations are spending about $1,200 to fly a candidate in, or about $300 if they're compensating them for some kind of travel on by car or train. So if you're doing that, you can calculate what your typical expense on a cost per hire is, or across the board for a certain program, and really make a goal for what you're going to actually reduce that, and we'll talk about that in a second. Again, improving quality of hire. Some organizations have some great ways of actually tracking this and making it more tangible or measurable. Others treat this as more of an intangible ROI. So whether it's hiring managers aren't seeing candidates until the final round, and therefore we're having to bring in 7 or 8 candidates, or it's just hard for some people to actually assess skills because recruiters may or may not have that background in the technical experience to evaluate the candidates. And so they're having to pass more candidates through. Whatever that might be, you can outline your different challenges. And you'll see the right-hand side here is certainly a little bit blank, and the reason is because then number 4, what you're going to do is you're going to take those challenges that you're identifying, and on the right-hand side, outline those results. So take each bullet point that you've outlined and tie it to video interviewing. So video interviewing is going to allow more flexibility in the process, and that's going to help reduce the productivity that is tied up for recruiters and coordinators. Okay. And it's the other one that we've taken, for example, time consuming to get hiring manager feedback. Well, here you have the convenience of actually providing them an easy-to-use system where, again, they can just click a link in their email, get to the candidate video, and then while watching the video, they can actually rate the candidate right there on the same system. So it does make it very simple for hiring managers. They can also, in many video interviewing platforms, now offer mobile as well. So if they're getting an email on the road, they can be actually watching the interview from their mobile devices or tablets and rate them right there as well. Again, the reducing of the travel expenses is a little more black and white of a tangible ROI. So if you're reducing your travel expenses, you can make the argument that what we're going to do is we're going to use this live video interviewing technology prior to bringing them on site, and that's going to help reduce the number of on-site interviews or flights or travel that we're going to have to rely on because we are actually evaluating the candidates ahead of time. What that will also do is, even if it's not necessarily reducing your travel expenses, what it will do is it'll fix your expenses. So what I mean by that is, even if you're not saving, you are structured. So you understand that if the candidate is 700 miles away or 1,200 miles away, it's the same cost. So you are fixing it to whatever the cost of a live video interview might be, rather than where the candidate is located. So again, I encourage you to not necessarily think of the reduced travel expenses as necessarily a reduction, but more fixing those costs, so you do understand what they're going to be on an annual basis. And then finally, improving the quality of hire. So the recruiter and candidate flexibility is, again, the same type of convenience that you're getting out of that, as well as the convenience of providing feedback between schedules so that you can engage those hiring managers and they can actually evaluate those skill sets. So we've taken those defined results, and I just want to gather what your typical cost per hire is, and I'll get back to why we're doing this in a second. I'll show you where we're going to go. I just want to get a better idea of what your typical cost per hire is. If you don't know it, feel free to not fill it out. Many organizations have a pretty good idea, and I do know it does vary by position to position, but share your best knowledge of what your cost per hire is. I should have just launched that. Great. Get your about 5 more seconds here, and then we'll close and share it. Great. So not surprisingly, it's a little across the board, and the reason that I want to do this is more self-reflection. So it's important to know what your average cost per hire is, because a lot of these metrics and solutions that you're going to be pitching will probably tie to your estimated cost per hire. So whether you're reducing your cost of travel, that should bring down your cost per hire, or even improving the productivity of your recruiters so that they can either focus more on the quality and less on the numbers. But it is important to have this as part of your business case involved in it, so you can tie everything back to your cost per hire as well as the quality, which we're discussing. So at the end of the day, what we're going to do is we're going to take those opportunity items that we outlined in step number 3, and we're going to define our results, which is this column right here, objective results. So what are we targeting? If we're reducing our time to fill and I'm telling you that many of our clients are talking about 50%. Then maybe you can have a conservative goal of we're going to reduce our time to fill by 25%. And here's how we're going to do it. So just to justify it based on the rationale of video interviewing. Reducing time to fill, the same notion. I've walked through kind of these specific examples of why these opportunity items can be solved by video interviewing. And then for things like improved quality of hire, if your organization doesn't have a true metric of how to track this, what you can do is use some free survey tools and really gather from the hiring managers whether that they feel that they're able to better evaluate candidates based on this video interview versus getting the resume with some of the recruiter notes. So there are some important ways that you can track some of that stuff, even if it's not what you were doing prior to that. That's justifying the solution. And then finally, what do we do from here? So I encourage you to obviously think about some of the video interviewing providers. Certainly if you're looking at the live technology, you can consider the free tools as well. Let me just jump off of, sorry about that. I'll just pop back real quick. I noticed people weren't able to actually see what I was doing. So justifying the solution. So we talked about this here. I apologize. I was still sharing the poll. I'll just leave that up for another second. Okay. So suggesting a plan for implementation. So how do we take that information and really we've shown our stakeholders that we've done some research, and now we want to actually make some steps towards trying this out to validate whether the solution truly is going to solve some of these identified problems. The best example I can give you is obviously to pilot this in a particular program, a set of positions, or maybe handpick a couple of recruiters. That's typically what we've seen, which is handpicking a select number of champions or recruiters from different areas, and that's probably the most important. So positions that we know are going to work well, positions that may or may not work well, or ones that we have some serious hesitations about. Because I think what you'll find, and we've seen this in our organization when going through some of the change management with clients, that they are surprised at the diversity of positions that it can work with, regardless of the pre-recorded or live. Naturally, a lot of organizations do look to campus recruiting as an early solution, but there are some other pilot areas that you can do. Again, selecting the recruiters from different areas is great. Then you take those pilots and you share best practices, and then you can roll it out to the different visions. So these are the 6 steps, and I encourage you to certainly look through the 6 steps. But what we'll do is we'll actually jump to the guides. Before I do that, just again, quick background on our company. It's Async Interview. We're a video interviewing provider, and we do provide both the pre-recorded and live video interviewing technologies. And we do have a number of different Fortune 500, Fortune 1000, and certainly much smaller organizations that use video interviewing, some just pre-recorded, others live. You can certainly learn some more information on our website and some use cases about how these organizations are using video interviewing. And then finally, this is probably your takeaway for the day, which is how do you go about kind of mapping this out? So just map out your current process. You can go here and actually download a free ROI where we'll send you back your ROI for your organization. And then you can also download your sample template right here. And that'll give you a good idea of how to actually put in your key opportunity items, your problems, and things like that. And it just puts it in a clean one-page version. And then here you can take that final business case that you've developed, the business template, and actually present that to your leadership team. So that's it. Again, I encourage you, you're more than welcome to kind of download those ROIs and go build your business case. Hopefully that was helpful in terms of understanding what some of the ROI benefits of implementing video interviewing. We'll jump real quick to some of the questions that we did get through the presentation. So Kitty Patterson, thank you. You asked, did you state the Skype and Google Hangout was not secure sites? So I mentioned that some concerns from, organizations have been that there are some very serious technological holes in Skype or Google Hangouts that don't meet some requirements by organizations. So some of those can be that, when Skype is conducting an interview, somebody can be recording that outside of the network, so outside of the 2 people that are conducting. So again, there are some security holes. It's more for your IT department to really understand what your organization has from an IT perspective. So again, in some cases, organizations cannot meet those standards of using those tools as interviewing technologies. Another question was, what kind of costs are involved to set up a pre-recorded interview? And that's a great question. So many of the companies in the video interviewing space that offer pre-recorded have slightly different models. Generally, from a change management perspective, again, a lot of them are, if not most of them, are web-based technologies. So for most of the organizations, they do not all involve IT involvement to do any kind of installation or anything like that. It is all browser-based. Everyone has a login. On the recruiter side, the hiring managers, again, don't really need to log in. And then the candidates will get their invitation separately. So the pre-recorded costs, other than the subscription of the provider, which, again, it does differ between the organization, there aren't any transactional costs, so to speak. And then the final question that was asked was, are there any ramifications of affirmative action? So again, this really touches on discrimination, and it's probably one of the most common questions. The EEOC did come out and actually talk a little bit more about video interviewing, and again, our recommendation, if it's used properly and the employees are trained properly on what to evaluate candidates for during these video interviews, that there's no harm from an EEOC perspective. And again, we can talk a little bit more about the use case and in applying it to your organization. It's just a matter of making sure that the employees are all trained properly. And what we typically find is that if an organization has those policies and procedures in place and they are appropriate, that there's no difference between video interviewing and a phone screen. Keep in mind, you are always going to see the candidates anyway. And the last question that just did come in is, how do you see the mobile platform or application changing over the next year or so? It's a great question. Mobile is still something that's fairly new in video interviewing, but even more so in the actual recruiting industry as a whole. So, you're starting to see more and more applications from candidates come in through mobile. And that's something that we're starting to evaluate more from a video perspective. So a lot of the video that's being done on mobile is honestly just watching the interviews, but having the ability for candidates to record the interviews from their mobile devices is still something, as the mobile devices and tablets improve in quality of the hardware, you're able to have them record better videos from mobile devices. And then more importantly, you can potentially have them record interviews at point of application and then not release it until you select candidates or displace them from the application process. So there are a lot of opportunities as mobile develops, but I think mobile as a whole, from an industry perspective, will probably kind of grow at an equal rate. So video interviewing will follow, what's being done at the sourcing level, and it'll just work through the chain or the workflow. Great question. Any other questions before we jump off here? Okay, well, great. Thank you, everyone, for joining. I appreciate it. We will go ahead. So here's my contact information. You're certainly more than welcome to jot it down or give me a call at any time. Or you can certainly send me a tweet as well. Again, I monitor my own Twitter feed.